Hey everybody, it's your host Double M from the Touch 'Em Up podcast, and I'm coming at you with some massive breaking news regarding the UFC 294 card at the end of October in Abu Dhabi. One of the biggest cards of the year for the UFC, aside from Madison Square Garden and International Fight Week. We've got three massive fights, and one very interesting matchup, considering a recent fight that was just scratched from UFC 291. But we're going to kick it off with what is announced as the main event in a rematch from UFC 280, a rematch from the UFC 280 main event for the lightweight championship of the world. You have the champion coming off of that razor-thin split decision win over Alexander the Great Volkanovski, the 145-pound champion, and Islam Makhachev taking on the man coming off of that first-round knockout over Beneil Dariush, and the man who Islam Makhachev defeated for the lightweight championship via arm triangle choke submission in Charles Do Bronx Oliveira. Oliveira versus Makhachev. Listen, I'm interested in seeing this fight because these are two of the best lightweights in the entire division, two of the best lightweights in the world. But if I'm going to be 100% honest and transparent here, I don't see the fight taking place much different from the original bout. Now, I did pick Charles Oliveira to defeat Islam Makhachev the first time I broke down the matchup, and I still think that Oliveira has the striking advantage. I still feel like if he can use those teeps to the body and use front kicks and teep kicks and inside and outside low kicks and be able to keep Islam Makhachev at a striking distance, that he can win this fight. And if he's able to catch Islam Makhachev in a guillotine, if he's able to sweep off of the bottom with a half guard sweep, a full guard sweep, a scissor sweep, look to lock up the leg locks through the Ashigarami game, I still feel like Oliveira has some opportunities to win this matchup, but the best opportunities for him is going to be in the kickboxing range or inside the boxing range, where he can land one of his big shots on Islam Makhachev's chin and knock him out. Islam Makhachev is a man we saw get dropped by Alexander Volkanovski when they fought back at UFC 284, and he's also a man who we've seen get knocked out in the UFC, but it was a very long time ago by a man named Adriano Martins. But I don't see this fight playing out much different. Honestly, I would love to see Charles Oliveira get the belt back. I would love to see him finish Islam Makhachev. Not to say I don't respect the game of Islam, not to say that I don't believe he's a more well-rounded fighter than Khabib, because I do, and I've said that before, but at the same time, excuse me, I feel like Islam Makhachev has the blueprint to beat Charles Oliveira. And even if you go back before the Islam and Oliveira fight, Oliveira has notoriously had issues off of his back. He's been taken down and grounded and pounded in fights before. He's been grounded and pounded from the top by a man the likes of the Irish Dragon Paul Felder, who actually knocked him out inside of his guard. And he's very good, from the top position. He's very good at catching opponents shooting takedowns, in guillotine chokes, kind of like he did against the Motown phenom Kevin Lee. But if Islam Makhachev is on top of Charles Oliveira, even though he had some decent wrestling scrambles and reversals to work his way back up to the feet in the first fight, I feel like the more improved fighter from the first fight until now is going to be Islam Makhachev. And Islam Makhachev was able to drop Oliveira on the feet with a beautiful right hook after a straight left hand. And considering that the striking was supposed to be Oliveira's best path to victory, I just don't see this fight playing out too much different. I would love to see Oliveira get the belt back, like I said. I would love to see him defeat Islam Makhachev. I'd love to see him knock out or submit Islam Makhachev. But when it comes down to it, I just don't see it playing out too differently. And I feel like I said already, in my opinion, that the more improved fighter from the first fight until now is going to be the champion in Islam Makhachev, and I expect him to retain the title against Charles Oliveira via a third-round submission. I think it's going to be a rear naked choke this time, but I would love to see Oliveira get the belt back. I just don't think it's in the cards for him right now, to be honest. Alright, and the next fight that was announced is kind of an interesting one, because we thought that we were going to see the UFC newcomer and Dana White Contender Series alum in Ikram Alaskerov, a man who fought Khamzat Chimaev back on the regional scene, fight at UFC 291 against Paulo Costa. However, it looks like that fight is completely scrapped, but we thought that Ikram Alaskerov was going to be staying on the card for UFC 291, but that is not the case. Ikram Alaskerov is going to be going up against another ranked middleweight in Nasruddin Imavov, fighting out of Paris. I believe he trains alongside Cyril Gane, and he's a very good striker, and I would venture to say he's a better striker than Alaskerov, but we don't have a ton to look at in terms of the eye test for Ikram Alaskerov in the UFC. He only fought Phil Hawes in his UFC debut, and he was able to rock him with a head kick and land a picture-perfect 1-2 on the southpaw, which knocked Phil Hawes out cold in the opening round. And even on the Contender Series, he took his opponent Souza down to the mat, got inside control, and immediately locked up a Kimura submission and got the finish right away. The tap was immediate once that Kimura was locked in. But going up against Nasruddin Imavov, I feel like Imavov is the more technical striker. I feel like he's going to want to keep this fight at the distance he wants to. And the one thing I've noticed from Alaskerov so far is that he kind of has a style of defense on the feet that reminds me a little bit of Khabib. And I don't think it's as herky-jerky or defensively irresponsible as Khabib. Like, I feel like Ikram Alaskerov's defense works better, but he moves around, uses that lead hand to measure his opponents, but he kind of pulls away, leaning back with his chin in the air, and almost kind of shoulder rolls any potential power that's coming towards him when he's backing up. He has a little bit of a Philly shell shoulder roll style, but he also uses the long guard with the lead hand to keep the opponent away, which can also aid in getting that outside foot with the check hook, and then setting up that beautiful 1-2 that he has. And the one thing I like is that he can land that 1-2 from very awkward angles. He can come with uppercuts, he can come with right hooks from similar angles, so it makes the opponent kind of second guess whether it's a straight, whether it's an uppercut, or whether it's a hook, because the trajectory and the setup for all of his shots all kind of come off that lead hand frame and using that shoulder roll to kind of disguise the setup for the power hand or the lead hand jab. And that's what I like, and I think that will give Imavov some trouble, but honestly, if Ikram Alaskerov is going to win this fight, I think he's going to use his wrestling, use his grappling, and get in the top position. Imavov's a good grappler as well. He has good top position. He's very good from the crucifix. We saw that in his fight against Edmund Shabazian, where he butchered him from the top in the crucifix position. I think this is a better fight, or at least a fight that makes more sense for Alaskerov than the Costa fight did, because I don't think he should have been fighting up that high, but I think they wanted to kind of build him up to be able to fight Khamzat Chimaev, which is going to be the next fight we talk about for Khamzat and Paulo Costa. But when it comes to Ikram Alaskerov and Nasruddin Imavov, I think the fight's competitive. I think it's very close on paper because Imavov might be the more technical and sharper striker on the feet, but Alaskerov's awkward angles and the way he sets up his punches might be able to catch a guy who's kind of a textbook, by the books, paint by numbers, step by step technical striker. So I'm going to lean with Alaskerov ever so slightly, because I think he's going to implement the grappling, the takedowns, and the top control, and then use that to mix up his striking and make Imavov not know whether he's going to change levels for the takedowns. But I think this is a very competitive fight. I wouldn't be surprised if Alaskerov lost this one, but I think the grappling is going to be, laying down the bricks on his path to victory. But give me Alaskerov via submission in this fight. All right, and the next fight up, we're going to talk about the final fight we're going to break down in this video, or at least somewhat break down, is going to be the UFC middleweight fight between the former middleweight title challenger and Paulo the Eraser Costa, who was supposed to fight Ikram Alaskerov at UFC 291, taking on Khamzat Chimaev, who we haven't seen since UFC 279 in September of 2022, where he was able to lock up that first round Darce choke submission against the short notice replacement opponent in Kevin Trailblazer Holland after coming in severely overweight for a potential main event against Nate Diaz. But we know about that card and everything that happened. But man, I love this fight between Costa and Chimaev. This was the original fight that was supposed to take place, and then Costa got booked against Alaskerov and everybody kind of scratched their head. I think that Khamzat Chimaev versus Paulo Costa is an extremely competitive matchup. Paulo Costa, I believe, to be the more technical striker between him and Chimaev. I think he's more technical. I think he has a lot more power on the feet than Chimaev, but I also think he's going to be at a little bit of a speed disadvantage against Chimaev, and Chimaev switches stances a lot between southpaw and orthodox. We saw him drop Gilbert Burns with the southpaw jab, which is something that Gilbert Burns has a lot of trouble with, even if you go back and look at the fight and the championship fight loss where he lost to Kamaru Usman, but he has issues with the southpaw jab, but that's besides the point. Chimaev is not as technical as Paulo Costa on the feet. Costa's going to have a lot more power in his kicks, and he's going to have a lot more knockout power, but I think the snappy punches and kind of the speed advantage may go to Khamzat Chimaev. But the biggest advantage and the biggest glaring omission of Paulo Costa's game, I believe, is going to be the takedown defense. I think if Chimaev gets in on the hips of Paulo Costa early and takes him down and is able to work from that top position and look to set up a submission, he might be able to take Costa down in the first round and submit him, because if you go back and look at Paulo Costa's last fight from UFC 278, he lost via submission, or no, he didn't lose, but he got put in positions against the UFC returning fighter in a former middleweight champion in Luke Rockhold. Even though he was able to get back up, even though he was able to scramble out of positions and wind up on top against Luke Rockhold, who is a very solid and decorated grappler in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, he still had some issues with getting taken down, getting reversed, giving his back up in certain positions. And I think if you do that against Chimaev, I think you're in a lot of trouble. Now, Rockhold is a world-class grappler, and I'd actually like to see what it would be like if Rockhold and Chimaev were to grapple each other. Maybe they could do that at like a quintet or a grappling style match, or CFFC grappling match if they were able to do it. But I'd love to see Chimaev and Rockhold grapple each other, but that's besides the point. When it comes to this fight, I think Chimaev is at a disadvantage on the feet. We saw him get rocked and hurt by Gilbert Burns, who is a welterweight. This is going to be at middleweight. I mean, Costa hits so much harder than Gilbert Burns. I feel like he might not be as fast, but the power and the technique of Costa, if he catches Chimaev on the chin, he might knock him out cold. If he catches him with that beautiful left hook, the right uppercut, the 1-2, or even that right head kick that he wrapped around the dome of Yoel Romero, I think Costa has the opportunity to catch Chimaev on the feet and knock him out. But when it comes to the fight in terms of the grappling perspective, I think if Chimaev gets in on the hips of Costa and takes him down, I think he can submit him in the first round. And I think that's kind of what we're going to see here. I'd love to see Costa win. I think it's very competitive on the feet. I'd even give the advantage in the striking and the power to Costa when it comes to the matchup on the feet. But I think we're going to see Chimaev use that wrestling right off the bat, change levels, get the takedowns. He might not get it right away, but eventually he gets the takedown and is able to catch the neck of Costa and get a submission. So I am going to go with Khamzat Chimaev to defeat Paulo Costa via submission, but at the same time, I think this is a very competitive matchup, and it wouldn't shock me one bit if Costa was able to knock out Chimaev on the feet. This is the best fight you could make for Khamzat Chimaev at this point. I know we were maybe going to see Jared Cannonier, but that fight's not going to happen anymore. I think this is the best fight. This is the most entertaining fight. I am going to lean Chimaev by sub, but I love everything about Costa and Chimaev. And that's going to wrap it up for my UFC 294 little preview and breakdown prior to the fight. Obviously, we'll have predictions when the fight gets closer. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on each of these fights in the comments, how you think they're going to play out, who you think's going to win, or even if you think there's certain betting angles to look at way out before we even get any betting lines. But yeah, that's going to be it for today on this little UFC 294 discussion, and I'm out.